On one hand, it feels like it should have been a 6-episode miniseries. How much have we heard that before? But on the other, it feels far too big a story to be done on television. Welcome back, MCU fans, to my spoiler-free review of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, the first MCU review of 2023 and the starting chapter of Phase 5, where we find the Ant-Man family, Scott Lang, Hope, Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne, and Scott's daughter, Cassie Lang, pulled unexpectedly into the quantum realm, interacting with strange new creatures and embarking on an adventure against a menace known as Kang, who will push them beyond the limits of what they thought was possible. And the reception for Quantumania thus far has been divisive, to say the least. And I genuinely don't get it. Not because this is one of my favorite MCU movies, I don't think it's even going to be one of my favorite movies of the year, but it is my favorite of the Ant-Man movies, and we'll dive into why in just a bit. However, the Ant-Man films so far have been palate cleansers. While the main events of Age of Ultron or Infinity War happen here, Ant-Man more so operates on the sidelines of the MCU, with Scott Lang going on his little adventures to help the little people. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, however, is taking a drastic change in direction, becoming a cementing chapter for the phase and for the future of the MCU by bringing Scott face to face with Kang the Conqueror. And while that is ambitious and it feels so much bigger and so much more important than the previous Ant-Man films, I found it equally enjoyable, but also equally as flawed as the previous two Ant-Man films. This one just fits more my taste, as it fully embraces being a B sci-fi caper with weird blob creatures, imaginative vistas, creative action, and of course, a giant floating head, which we'll get to in time. It's just very Star Wars-y as a whole, even John Carter-ish, which I deeply appreciated. It is very much my thing, while keeping the heart of the previous installments. A focus on parent and children dynamics, second chances, and in the words of Scott Lang himself, it looks out for the little guy, even having a subplot about freedom fighters standing up to the ominous rule of Kang. It has all those elements that made the first two Ant-Man films stand out, but there's added flair to the visuals and character dynamics. All the characters are refreshingly unique from the cosmic side of the MCU, and really the designs of the entire world are goofy and weird and out there. They're lively and visually interesting. The movie manages to make the quantum realm as a whole feel like all new territory, not only for us, but for the characters, raising the level of intrigue. Hell, this movie got me feeling for buildings more than Pixar ever made me feel for cars. Plus, you have the significant improvement on the film's villainous presence, while uncompromising that cherished, intimate identity of Ant-Man and the Wasp that still delivers a similar structure, where Scott has to do a heist. It just happens to be a very trippy, weird, quantum heist working for the bad guy. And from there, the conflict still goes back to Hope and Hank and Janet, who knows the real danger of what is going on, but is hiding it away from the rest of the Ant-Man family. They make her a very important character in here, and it really works in the film's favor. But while it delivers that lightheartedness that it knows so well, that these characters need so much, it also knows when to anchor the narrative in needed emotionality. And that takes form in Kang, who is built up as a Machiavellian parallel to the Wizard of Oz, the mysterious, ominous conqueror and ruler of the quantum realm, who even lives in a citadel. It's just not emerald in this case, but Jonathan Majors dominates this movie. What a performance. What a character. There is so much he does just with his eyes and body language to add to Kang without uttering a single word. Kang holds clear strength and dominance beyond anything the heroes are capable of, which makes him and Ant-Man contrast so beautiful from one another, with Scott's aloof, somewhat relaxed personality contrasting with his non-fuckery attitude. He sets the tone for every scene he is in. You feel when Kang is not down to fuck around. You feel that weight. You feel that assertiveness, which only reinforces the most important and compelling elements of any Ant-Man story, Scott being in way over his head. This has it all. But it's not just that. Kang is a villain with unshakable conviction, with so much to actually make you side with him. Yet, never as much as you fear him. This is one frightening villain who manages to be absolutely terrifying whenever he's in control, and it seems to be for the most part of this film, but he manages to be even scarier when he seems to be on the losing end of a struggle. And what makes him so effective is that he is afraid of something. And the way they build him up is all through Janet's fear. There's a connection there that is set up right at the beginning of the film, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but the way they build him up, the way they reveal him, the way they unleash him on this film, on the characters around him, and then show you that a character like this, who's in complete control, who knows so much beyond this one universe, beyond what these characters, what our heroes know, and yet he's afraid of something. He's fighting to protect the multiverse for something so much worse, according to him. And that is so effective in this film. There's also enough context and characterization that adds to the previous version of the character we saw in Loki. Yet, it manages to enrich both versions of the characters, the malevolent Kang the Conqueror and the benevolent He Who Remains, who Jonathan Majors plays so differently, yet brings such distinct and unquestionable gravitas to what promises to be an exciting long-term MCU threat. What makes Kang work so well in the context of this film too is that he is so much the antithesis of Scott. He is a ruler, he is all-powerful, he is all-knowing, he is so much larger than life, yet Scott is still so grounded. He is the guy who starts this film optimistic, hopeful, and having come out of the events of Endgame, shaped by those experiences, and having turned them into something positive for himself. He wrote a book, he's back together with his daughter, has a loving family with the Pims and a girlfriend in Hope, and while he was clearly affected by those experiences, as anyone would be, he has taken it in stride, he has found inspiration in it to inspire other people. He has looked out for the little guy. Scott is the people's hero in this film. So yeah, it's silly, but it opens the door for an existential arc for Scott as the film unravels, which is so interesting. Not only when he's confronted on his beliefs and ideology with Kang, but in a microcosm with his daughter and really his family. Seeing the two drastically different characters couldn't be more entertaining and even fascinating. Their worldview, demeanor, and really power level are so much the opposite of one another to the point where it feels the almighty Kang the Conqueror despises Scott for what he's actually able to accomplish in riling up a revolution without any quote-unquote strengths as a hero. But it is so successful in creating this opposing dynamic between protagonist and antagonist. I wish the film was smaller, no pun intended, and also it told its story from Kang's perspective. Hear me out. The effectiveness of throwing a small-scale team of heroes into the kaleidoscopic depths of the quantum realm, dealing with a multiversal threat all by themselves. But without spoiling anything, and this might be my favoritism towards that story talking, Kang's story in this film has so many strong parallels to Planet Hulk. It is nigh impossible to not see the promise of adjusting the POV in this film to it becoming Kang's story. In all honesty, it does a far better job at taking from that comic than Thor Ragnarok did. Except this time, the person crash landing on the planet, or in this case the quantum realm, is the most dangerous threat imaginable. So yeah, I'm a big nerd, and that is a nitpick. There are, however, bigger issues, namely the film's clunky structure and the exposition-heavy dialogue and side characters. Namely, the one who stands out for the worst is Hope, who gets so little to do besides two big moments. It shouldn't necessarily be awkward, as I don't think the MCU has done the best job at elevating the Wasp to be a main event character, speaking in wrestling terms, besides having her as a title character, but she is a title character. This is Ant-Man and the Wasp, and yet Evangeline Lilly has so little to do, despite doing the most she can with the time she's given. And while I found Cassie lovable and well played by Catherine Newton, I found the writing for her character to be superficial and way too one-note. She doesn't even meet up with any believable opposition as the film unfolds, besides a certain mechanical organism designed only for killing. We'll get to him, I told you before. There's at least a clear focus on her and Scott's dynamic, and the script has something to say with it, which is enjoyable, as both Newton and Rudd are absolute charmers. But Hope and Janet's relationship, still damaged from their lost time, contains a clear parallel to Scott and Cassie, who were able to reconnect, but Janet, holding so many secrets and hiding things from her family, has not allowed that same second chance to Hope. And while it gets off to a good start, it barely meets a resolution. I will argue it meets no resolution whatsoever. It's just left off to the side and forgotten in the quantum realm. One thing is clear. This is Scott and Cassie's movie first, Kang and Janet's movie first. It is even Hank's movie first, who comes full circle from the first film and has his love for ants validated in such an amusing yet short story thread before the film ever thinks of giving Hope a meaningful arc. The dialogue at moments can be too overcooked, which is saying something. Well, we just had Shyamalan over-explaining his thesis with Knock at the Cabin. Quantumania goes so far as to spoon-feed you the meaning of its subtext in its key beats, sometimes losing all its effectiveness. It doesn't take away from the merits of the film, but it happens far too often. It's distracting. And speaking of distracting, let's talk about that big floating head, MODOK. Look, I adore they fully embraced the goofiness of such a character and injected him into the only MCU sub-franchise he could ever belong in, fitting right in with blob creatures, weird solar panel robots, living buildings, and Bill Murray. The movie and the characters never take him seriously, and they do not ask you to do so. Is the big floating head somewhat jarring and trapped in the uncanny valley? Yes. Does he work for the gags that are so inherently an identity of this franchise? 100%. Does he even heighten the dichotomy between Scott's grounded persona and an elevated villain such as Kang? It's probably his biggest contribution for the film. But does the use of the character and his presence ultimately feel replaceable by the end? Unfortunately, yes. MODOK essentially embodies the problem with Quantumania. It wants to do so much with him that it feels out of nowhere. It manages to be entertaining and head-scratching all at once. The film as a whole has many great elements, but perhaps too many for a single film. On one hand, it feels like it should have been a 6-episode miniseries. How much have we heard that before? But on the other, it feels far too big a story to be done on television. Quantumania is ambitious. It is important in and of itself and for the MCU's future. And it is also uncompromised in its goals, which I admire. I love how Kang feels like he doesn't belong in this film. Ant-Man isn't a threat to him, he's a much bigger menace. The movie knows that, and it makes it work. But in bringing the whole family aboard, it needs to give everyone something significant to do, a big part to play. And so, with only 2 hours to tell its story, it has to contrive its way to do so at points, not allowing the narrative to flow properly with so many character arcs. But as we dive into my final thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, it is time for the fun part, where you start the conversation about it in the comments below with your thoughts on the film, your ranking of all 3 Ant-Man movies, and how you think Phase 5 of the MCU has kicked off. Anything and everything down there. If you're enjoying this review, there's much more MCU content right up here, and there will be more MCU content throughout 2023. So if you want to talk MCU movies and TV, this is the place to be. Consider clicking that subscribe button, and you won't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV. Quantumania is not as focused as I wish it was, but its purpose and end goal go a long way. It begins as your typical Ant-Man adventure, but there is no denying the weight of the massive ramifications it has, not only for the future of the MCU, but on the most important elements of this story, its characters and the roles they have to play as the little guys. Maintaining the family-centric heart of its predecessors, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is a zany romp with a welcomed, elevated sense of menace, thanks to the brilliant Jonathan Majors and Kang's striking presence. It is goofy, charming, and pulpy, an overall solid, but not great start for Phase 5. I'm giving Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania a B. Those are my spoiler-free thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Thank you so much for watching. That is an ending and post-credit scenes explained video coming tomorrow because you voted for it, and I hope to see you there so we can nerd out on all that goodness. Big shout out to my channel members for always supporting the channel, and until the next one, love each other and love the movies.